Good evening. Welcome. I'm excited to see so many of you here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, I am Jacqueline Hidalgo, and I'm a professor of theology and religious studies here at the University of San Diego. I focus on the study of the New Testament, in fact, so it's my distinct pleasure and honor to introduce this evening's event with such a distinguished biblical scholar. But I want to begin this event by acknowledging that I stand as a grateful guest on the traditional and unceded territory of the Kumeyaay Nation. I acknowledge that as a migrant to this land, I am the beneficiary of a long and cruel history of settler colonial violence, land theft, and dehumanization that continues to impact the Native people of this continent and many parts of the world. We offer specific respect to the citizens of the Kumeyaay Nation, both past and present, and their continuing relationship to their ancestral lands as we gather on these lands to have a conversation about the histories and legacies of settler colonialism in another context. Tonight's event is part of a series of teach-ins about Palestine. These teach-ins this fall have been organized by a coalition of faculty, staff, and students and alumni and at multiple regional colleges and universities, including USD, San Diego State University, Mesa College, the University of California at San Diego, Cal State San Bernardino, and Cal State San Marcos. This coalition has worked together to provide our communities with a series of cultural events and multiple perspectives. Our aim is to create space for complex learning and respectful dialogue that encourages us all to think critically about our relationship to what is happening in Palestine. And I'm quite grateful to this coalition for their ongoing work and for their interest in inviting this great scholar to speak with us this evening. And I also want to thank the University of San Diego for providing space and support. We have two other events planned this semester and more in the planning stage for the spring semester. The next and 10th event this fall will be a lecture called Genocide on Trial: Can International Law Hold Israel Accountable? It will take place on December 5th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. in Storm Hall 127 at San Diego State University. Then we'll be back here on Thursday, December 12th, from 12 to 2 p.m. and Friday, December 13th, from 9 to 10 a.m., where Professor Ted Falk's History of Palestine class will have poster sessions about their final projects that are open to the public in the History PSIR hallway. The students will do a Q&A with guests as they circulate. Before we get to this evening's program, which I will introduce shortly, I want to first welcome and give a few minutes to another guest we have with us tonight. Tamara Sharifov, a Kroc School of Peace Studies graduate and co-founder of the refugee relief organization Rise Up Humanity. And I'm going to pull up the website for you and take it away.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting. I'm actually going to stand here. Can you guys hear me without the mic? Oh, sorry. Okay. How's this? Perfect. Thank you so much for having me, you guys. My name is Tamara Sharifov. I am one of the founders and the vice president of an international humanitarian organization that predominantly does aid in northern Lebanon. From 2019 to about 2022, we were very active in the city of Tripoli, providing humanitarian aid across 3 refugee settlements to Syrian refugees, about 500 individuals. We were doing emergency aid, sustainable aid. We were providing food. We were providing fuel. We were providing gravel on the ground because Lebanon does experience all weather conditions in all seasons. We were providing clothing. We were doing Eid celebrations, for the psychosocial part of it, because we understand that people need to experience their culture regardless of, what has happened in their lives to have some normalcy. We did go dormant for about 2 years. I went back to school, and given that the conflict the assault on Lebanon, if I want to use correctly, has entered into Lebanon. On September 23rd, our ground team recontacted myself and the president and asked us to please relaunch our efforts. So we obliged. We've been very lucky that we've had a huge group of volunteers that have come together to help us relaunch our organization, revamp our organization, and start raising money as quickly as possible to actually build a shelter center in northern Lebanon. The airstrikes are incredibly profound. They're happening, as you know, much in the south. It's happening in central Beirut. It's happening in the east, where predominantly the Syrian population is, and it is happening in the north. You're not seeing it in the news, but one of our ground team members, the building next to her, was bombed, I would say, about 3 weeks ago. And we are an organization that tries to fill a gap for the most vulnerable of already a very vulnerable country and vulnerable population, and those are the individuals that are considered stateless in country, which is predominantly the Syrian population that fled into Lebanon during, the Syrian war, which is still happening right now. So I'm here to let you guys know about the organization, to kind of do a plea to you guys and say that we are a grassroots organization that is raising money. We don't get money through grants because we make an assurance that 100% of our donation makes it to the ground. The only thing we cannot avoid is processing fees, but our current platform does not take that because we are a 501c3 charitable organization. And if we need to transfer money via Western Union, we can't avoid that. But myself, the president, our volunteer, who's Michaela here, and anybody else who works for our organization does not get paid a dime. And that's how we are breaking the mold in humanitarian aid, to ensure that everybody knows where their money is going, and that we don't have an overhead cost. Yes, it is difficult, of course, for the individuals involved. It's a lot of work, and I don't know how sustainable it will be forever, but right now we're doing it. And so, like I said, we are attempting to raise at minimum $11,500 to build a shelter for 15 little shelters that each one will house 4 to 5 people, a family each. We'll also be able to build 4 bathrooms. We'll be able to have a kitchen, and we're going to be able to ensure electricity for a year. Plus, we do pay our ground team on the ground, who are also very reputable humanitarians. They've been working with different organizations for 7 or 8 years on the ground, and that's our way of ensuring that we're supporting the local economy, because our employees are actually also refugees, one Palestinian, one Syrian, and then they employ volunteers on the ground. So that is our organization. Our name is Rise Up Humanity. So thank you so much for allowing me to say this. I do have flyers if anybody's interested. So we have on the front, my apologies. We have on the front information on the project itself. And then there's a QR code right here, and all you need to do is click on the QR code. And then on the back, we have information on our organization. Okay, and so everything that it says here, just to ensure you guys that will be happening, we'll be having our first amount of money cleared, we think by the end of November. And unfortunately, we will be building through the winter. We don't have an option because everything has happened so quickly with the assault entering into Lebanon, but we know that we will have this shelter center for years to come. So thank you so much, and I hope if anybody's interested, let me know if you'd like a flyer. I don't know that I'll be able to stay the whole time to answer questions after, but if anybody is interested, Michaela's right there, so she's raising her hand, and you guys can ask her any questions you have and grab a flyer from her at the end if you're interested. Thank you so much for everybody's amazing work that we're all doing during this very difficult time that we're all finding ourselves in. Thank you.
Thank you. And one other note, if you do want to add your name to the mailing list for Gaza Teach-In events, there will be a sign-up sheet going around, so you can add your name to that list. But tonight, I am exceptionally pleased to introduce our main speaker, Reverend Dr. Mitri Raheb. He is founder and president of Dar al-Kalima University in Bethlehem, the most widely published Palestinian theologian to date. Dr. Raheb is the author and editor of 50 books, including Decolonizing Palestine, the Land, the People, the Bible, which is going to be the center of his conversation tonight. His books and numerous articles have been translated so far into 13 languages. Reverend Dr. Raheb also has served as the senior pastor of the Christmas Lutheran Church in Bethlehem from June 1987 to May 2017, and as the president of the Synod of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land from 2011 to 2016. He's founded several NGOs, including the Christian Academic Forum for Citizenship in the Arab World, and he's a founding and board member of the National Library of Palestine and a founding member of the Bright Stars of Bethlehem, a US 501c3 non-for-profit organization. He's an elected member to the Palestinian National Council, as well as the Palestinian Central Council. The work of Dr. Raheb has received wide media attention from major international outlets and networks, including CNN, ABC, CBS, 60 Minutes. The list goes on and on. The Reverend Dr. Raheb holds a doctorate in theology from the Philipps University in Marburg, Germany. And tonight, he's generously agreed to speak on his crucial 2023 book, Decolonizing Palestine, the Land, the People, the Bible. After his lecture tonight, there will be a Q&A with USD's own liberation theologian and professor of theology and religious studies, Dr. Matthew Vega, who's up front. Without further ado, I will turn things over to Dr. Raheb.
So I hope I get this. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Professor Jackie, for this introduction. Thank you, Professor John, for the invitation. And I'm excited to have the dialogue later with Professor Matt Vega. So it's great to be with you here. Glad to see so many students and faculty. I brought also some friends, the board of Bright Stars of Bethlehem that happens to meet here in San Diego this week. Yeah, I look forward to your questions and to engage later with you all through the Q&A. Decolonizing Palestine, the Land, the People, the Bible. The book actually came 2 weeks before October 7th. So it came out like, it wasn't planned like that, but it came out at the right moment. And it created actually lots of discussion, which I'm glad for. I would like to start with how best to describe the situation in Palestine. I saw that Tamara actually, she used the word conflict and then realized immediately this was not the right word, which is really true. So it's not a conflict between two people. So using the word conflict is already misleading. And it's not a religious conflict between Judaism and Islam, as some people like to portray. And it's definitely not a war between Hamas and Israel like we hear all the time on CNN or Fox News. And one word which I really hate is the word complicated. Because when people describe it as complicated, they mean it is not solvable, they don't want to deal with it, we cannot comprehend it. I never heard the word complicated when it comes to Ukraine. It's crystal clear, right? And Palestine also, it's crystal clear. And the name of the game is settler colonialism. And basically this book tries to bring the whole discussion of settler colonialism into theology. That is, I think, the new thing I try to do in this book. I don't think it was done before. And so in the first part of my lecture, I would like to look at the theory and practice of settler colonialism. I was pleased to hear Jackie starting her introduction by acknowledging that we are standing here on the land of the indigenous people. This is very important. It took you in this country maybe, 400 years to realize this? I'm not sure how long it would take the Israeli to realize this, but this is where we intend to go. You know, the idea that what's happening in Palestine is settler colonialism, actually, already people started talking about it in the 60s. Actually, some of the Palestinian scholars and thinkers, including Fayez Sayegh, he published a booklet in 1965. He was the Palestinian ambassador to the UN. And in 1965, he published this book where he described actually what's happening in Palestine as settler colonialism. And he used the word pumping in, pumping out, that Zionism is pumping in settlers into Palestine, and that they try to pump out the Palestinians, displace them from Palestine. It didn't receive really much attention at that time, like today it's becoming mainline and mainstream idea. But the term was reinvented in the post-Cold War era in anthropology and indigenous studies, and basically saying that with settler colonialism, it is in the term post-colonial was felt inadequate to describe context where colonization was not yet over, but continued to constitute an ongoing reality, a structure rather than an event. It's an ongoing thing. It's not a one-time thing. And Patrick Wolf and Lorenzo Ferrancini basically put the theory for this settler colonial idea, and lately Rashid Khaldi, another Palestinian scholar, actually used it for his latest book. Now, there is a difference between classic colonialism and settler colonialism. And the difference first is that in settler colonialism, settlers go to another country with the intention to stay there permanently. It's not like the French in Algiers or something, where you go there for a certain time, maybe you want to exploit the natural resources or whatever. No, the intention is to go there and to stay there with the intention to replace the indigenous people. So not to share the land with them, not to share the resources with them, but to replace them. That's very important when we talk about settler colonialism. And in this context, the native people, they become like the aliens, and the settlers become the natives. This is when you hear the Israeli talking about, going back to Palestine. I mean, most of them were never there, not their forefathers or foremothers. The Palestinian Jews, they stayed there anyhow. They belong to us. But this European settler is something else. Now, in this context, and this I think you know very well from this context here, the land is described then, the native land is described as terra nullius, which means empty or barren land that is just waiting to be discovered, thus becoming the private property of the settler. This is very important. It's the private property. The native people, they belong to the land. We belong to the land. The settlers, the land belongs to them. Big difference. And in order to do that, the native people are depicted with all, racist construct. They are called savage, violent, terrorists, while the settlers are portrayed as the civilized and brave pioneers. Again, you know it from this context, I think, better than I. And to defend the settled property from the savage, a police state is created and is granted extraordinary power over the native people, including power over their civil affairs. And to sum it, it's really all about geography and demography. So the settlers, they want to control all the geography, but to get rid of the native demography. This is what it's all about. And often to do that, you need to create a system of segregation, apartheid system, which we experience today in Palestine as well as in South Africa, in this country with segregation, etc. So now that's the theory. Let's come to the practice in Palestine, and I'm sure many of you have seen this map where you can see in 1882, there was like the first settlement, Jewish Israeli settlement, and how the Israeli keep taking more and more and more of the land. It becomes blue. And this is, if we look at the West Bank, this is how the West Bank looks today. And you hear in the news this week that Israel wants to annex the West Bank. Now, actually, this is already done. De facto, it is done. Now they want to do it de jure, so to legalize that. And everything you see here in violet as well as in green is basically what Israel wants to annex legally. And so you keep having then these small Palestinian pockets that they are in brown. And they add to that, all the walls that you see. I start the book in the first chapter talking about the situation in Bethlehem. And this is really very important because in contextual theology, we have to start with the context. This is contextual theology, follows, if you want, Aristotelian thinking. We start with the reality, not Platonic, where we start with the ideal. No, we start with the reality. And also to show people that in this book, I'm not talking about something theoretical, but I'm talking about something which we experience as a native Palestinian whose family has been living in Bethlehem for centuries, if not millennia. This is what we are experiencing. And just to show you, this is basically the first chapter. This is in the map here, you can see the Bethlehem County 1967. And in the last 50 plus years, first Israel annexed the northern part of Bethlehem, declared it part of Jerusalem, so we lost that part. And then in the first 40 years, Israel built 19 Jewish settlements. If you see where they are built in the northern part of Bethlehem and southwest. Why southwest? Because that's the most fertile area in Bethlehem. So Israel would like to control the water resources, the springs, the agricultural land. And then you have these four settlements, like in the middle of nowhere. Why they sit there? Because they sit over the largest underground water aquifer in the southern West Bank. So they sit literally on the water. They control it. They take 80% of our water resources, our own water resources. And then you have the settlement around the Dead Sea because they control tourism, the minerals of the Dead Sea, etc. All of this is what you see in blue is Area C, which is fully under Israeli control. And what you see here in brown is basically it's declared military zone, which means even we are not allowed to enter this zone. This was supposed to be, the green was supposed to be a park for the Palestinians, but usually they do this as the first step towards the taking over. So now it's also under Israeli control. So when Israel now talks about annexing the West Bank, basically they want to take everything you see here in blue, everything you see here in violet, everything you see here in green, and everything you see here in brown. So that's what they are talking about. And then they created bypass roads. These are roads that bypass Palestinian towns but connect Jewish settlements. In this case, they have a different function because we are not allowed anymore to build west of this road here, this road, nor to build east of this road. Basically, they are confining Bethlehem from two sides so that the city cannot grow, and the city that cannot grow is deemed basically to die. And remember, this is not the USA where everything is extra large, right? Between the two roads, we are talking about 3 miles. This is basically right now where we can move freely. If we want to go out of these 2 roads, there are already Israeli checkpoints. You can see we used to have also the wall that was built, the checkpoints, 29 checkpoints inside Bethlehem. There are right now 800 checkpoints in the West Bank. So if we go from one village to the other, we have to go through an Israeli checkpoint. So, and this is right now what you see in blue are the Jewish settlements that are currently under construction. You can see they are building basically a belt east of Bethlehem as well, so making it sure that the city will not expand. So this is the first chapter basically I showed you now in this one. Now, but to understand settler colonialism, I tried in the book to talk about 5 stages in this settler colonial process, settler colonization. But it didn't start actually among the Jewish people. That's the interesting thing. It was it was a Christian invention, and it was a British invention. Remember, the British in the 19th century, they were the empire of that era. And so it was really within, in Britain, that the idea of the settler colonization of Palestine started. And in the book I talk about Lord Shaftesbury, who was maybe one of the first to talk about the settler colonization of Palestine. In 1839, he published in the newspaper the idea of the colonization of Palestine. And the year is important, 1839, because 1839, it was the year when the European powers came to support the Ottomans and to push Ibrahim Pasha, an Albanian Egyptian ruler, to push him out of Palestine, because 1831 he occupied Palestine, the whole of Syria, and in 1839 they were able to push him back to Egypt. And from that moment, the Europeans started putting their eye on Palestine to colonize it. And the British were the empire. So, and then 1854 again he writes about it again, and 1854 was the Crimean War again, where the European powers were fighting over Palestine. And here you can see where he writes that the territory meaning Palestine, must be assigned to someone or other. Can it be given to any European potentate, to any American colony, to any Asiatic sovereign or tribe? Are these aspirants from Africa to fasten a demand on the soil from Hama to the river of Egypt? So from the Nile to the Euphrates? Then he says, no, there is a country without a nation without a country. His own once loved, nay, still loved people, the sons of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So here you can see actually this Christian Zionism that is really thinking of colonizing Palestine. And because Britain was the empire, they were able actually to do it. It wasn't just a theory, it became a reality. Now, here you can see also the racism of Shaftesbury, because these four categories were in the 19th century, the four races, right? And you hear this, this idea of settler colonialism where the land is barren, is terra nullius, without a nation. But there was a nation in Palestine, but they don't see it. We as Palestinians are not seen. Even today, when you have Western tourists going to Palestine, they don't see us. So, which again, Lord Balfour was able actually to make it happen. I always like to say for theological students, we have some of them, I guess, here, it wasn't the Lord God who promised Israel the land, it was Lord Balfour. And there is a big difference between the Lord God and the Lord Balfour. Okay? And so here you can see actually Lord Balfour, 1922, is saying that this idea was not only by political calcul, but there was also theological reasoning behind the Balfour Declaration. You know, important to remind us that not all Jewish thinkers were in favor of this idea. Somebody like here, you can see that many Jewish thinkers were actually talking about a binational state, but they were in the minority. And that wasn't what the empire at that time also wanted. In 48, then the second step, taking the land, 77% of historic Palestine, 520 Palestinian villages were destroyed, over 800 people were displaced. It was really the ethnic cleansing. What we see happening in Gaza today, that was the prelude to it. And the most difficult thing is that when the Israeli came together to decide on the name of this new state, they were debating many names. Herzliya was one, after Herzl. Ziona was another one after Zion, but then they decided to take the name Israel, which made so many people all the time confusing the biblical Israel with the state of Israel today, which is the biggest headache for us. Now, the third stage was expanding the boundaries. 1967, when Israel occupied the West Bank, the Sinai, the Golan Heights, including Jerusalem. And again, you can always see, and this is what I try to show in the book, how religion is always weaponized. So by using the word Israel for the name, you are weaponizing a biblical name. By calling the war the 6-day war, you are weaponizing the Bible, because the idea is the same way that God created the world in 6 days and then he rested. Now they did the job in 6 days, but they did not rest, nor they let us rest, okay? So, they started thinking of colonizing the West Bank, which is the biblical, again using the biblical name, Judea and Samaria. And in that year, actually, there was a shift in Israel because rabbis took over from the secular politicians. They were now the one who are giving the tone in politics. The fourth stage was negotiating a compromise, and this is basically after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We had the Oslo Accord, the idea of land for peace, but it's exactly like in North America. During the time of treaties, more native lands were taken. I mean, the whole western part of the US was taken while they were negotiating with the Native Americans. This led really to the colonization and Bantusization of the West Bank. There were more Jewish settlements, which are colonies, built during Oslo than before Oslo. So they were basically trying to discuss how to divide the cake while they were all the time eating the cake. And the last is what I call sealing the settler colonial project, which started for me with the Trump era. Here, this is Mike Pence's speech at the Knesset. I would like to read it because it tells you something about the culture in this country. Now, he's saying, Mike Pence is talking about Trump. During his historic visit to Jerusalem, President Trump declared that the bond between us, Americans and Israeli, in his words, is woven together in the hearts of our people, and the people of the United States have always held a special affection and admiration for the people of the book. In the story of the Jews, we have always seen the story of America. This is very important because what he's saying is true. It is the story of an exodus, a journey from persecution to freedom, a story that shows the power of faith and the promise of hope. Beautiful words. My country's very first settlers also saw themselves as pilgrims sent by Providence to build a new promised land. The songs and stories of the people of Israel were their anthems, and they faithfully taught them to their children and do to this day. And down through the generation, the American people became fierce advocates of the Jewish people's aspiration to return to the land of their forefathers, which is not true, to claim your own new birth of freedom in your beloved homeland. But this is basically the cultural understanding in the US is built on this myth, if you want. And now this led actually later, last year, Netanyahu, when he declared the new government, this is the first paragraph in the coalition agreement. He's saying, and this is from his Twitter account, these are the basic lines of the national government headed by me. The Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all the areas of the land of Israel. Now, the land of Israel, you have to replace with historic Palestine. So, exclusive right, so I don't have a right. But this is what it says. As a Palestinian, as a Christian, as somebody whose ancestors have been there for the last maybe 2,000, 3,000 years, I have no rights. And if anybody would like to question that, he will face problems, even in this country. And then he continued, the government will promote and develop settlement colonies in all parts of historic Palestine, in the Galilee, the Negev, the Golan, Judea, Bethlehem, and Samaria. So it's not something they are hiding anymore. They are proud of it. Again, they cannot do that without an apartheid system, because you have actually 6.5 million Jewish people and 6.5 million Palestinian people in historic Palestine today. Which, in order to change that demography, you have to do ethnic cleansing. And this is what we see happening in Gaza. Israel would like to get rid of the 2.2 million people in Gaza and to make our life in the West Bank so miserable that maybe half of us might immigrate, and then they can then the annexation is done. This is our own campus in Gaza. that was bombed by Israel during Holy Week this week, the last week of March. And if we look who is supporting Israel at the ICJ, they are all countries with a settler colonial history. Because the old settler colonial countries cannot abandon their latest project, Israel. So that is, I come now to the second part to talk about the theology that powers the settler colonialism. And here I talk about the hardware and the software. I mean, Israel can afford all of this for two reasons. First, because the Western world continued to provide Israel with the hardware. To date, $20 billion, right? Congress approved to Israel. In addition to the 38 billion that Obama, in addition to the 10 that was approved just a few months ago. So, I mean, there is no other country in the world that receives so much, support, and they get all the toys for free, the F-35 and the submarines from Germany, etc. So that is one, that's the hardware. But what is more difficult is even the software. And the software is the theological and ideological reasoning to support Israel. Thinking that by supporting Israel, they support actually a much more important issue, something that is of divine nature. That is our problem. And so theology is the nightmare for us. And this is when some people sometimes ask me, what is your profession? I don't tell them I'm a university president. I tell them I'm in the software cracking business. And the book basically is trying to crack some of this software. Part of this software is what we call Christian Zionism. And I talk about the different kinds of Christian Zionism in the book. But here I would like just to focus quickly on the American evangelical brand of Christian Zionism. By the way, they are right now meeting here down the road, all of them. I'm staying at the same hotel. It's crazy, so you have to pray for me to survive there. This kind of Christian Zionism in the U.S. actually, but even beyond the U.S., really got a boost after the 1967 war, after Israel was branded as with a biblical name. And remember, 1967, this was the time when the U.S. was fighting a war, right, in Vietnam. And the U.S. lost that war, more or less. But Israel won the war. And so these evangelical Christians thought, okay, then it means God is on the side of Israel, not on the side of the U.S. Why not on the side of the U.S.? Because they don't see America as a Christian nation anymore. And so they talked about the American Jeremiah. And 10 years later, 1977, the Likud party got to power, Begin. And Begin understood the importance of the Christian Zionists. Before, the Labour Party in Israel, they were more secular. They had nothing to do with these Christian Zionists. But Begin thought actually the Christian Zionists are maybe the most important support group for Israel because they believe exactly the same like these very conservative Jewish Zionists. And so from that moment on, they started actually cooperating together. And Netanyahu was the other president who really made this a very solid bond between the Christian Zionist and Israel. But, and this is important in the book because nobody before really talked about it, because always, I think, as theologians, mainline theologians, we thought, oh, maybe, these are the evangelical Christians. They are, anyhow, not very sophisticated in their thinking. More dangerous is actually what I call liberal Zionism. These are people who think they are liberal. They are for human rights. They are for everything we stand for, except when it comes to Palestine. And here I would like to quote this American theologian, Paul Van Buren, in one of his books. He writes, the role of the Christian church is to extend the revelation of the God of Israel and the healing work of God in and through Israel to the nations. Christianity should do this not only by preaching this gospel to the nations, but also by rendering service to the people of Israel. This service takes an external and internal form. Externally, the Christian church must become the extension of the Anti-Defamation League, combating all anti-Semitism among Gentiles. I mean, these words are just... It also takes the form of defense of the State of Israel, both raising money for Israel defense and defending the State of Israel against all anti-Zionist calumny. All criticism of the State of Israel, whether based on alleged injustice to the Palestinians, or claims that Israel is unjust to third world peoples, are simply lies. It is the job of the Christian church to combat all these lies against Israel, being taught the truth by Jews, that is, the government of the State of Israel. This is one of the most liberal Christian theologians. He is not a Christian Zionist in our, traditional understanding. And by the way, it's not only him. Here I have the picture of Karl Barth. Karl Barth started this problem. Sorry for Christian Reformed people here. And all disciples of Karl Barth went into this direction. Paul Van Buren was just one of them. So this is the liberal Christian Zionism that nobody talks about it. And there are so many different kinds of Christian Zionism. There is also the cultural Zionism, cultural Christian Zionism. This is when President Biden says, I am a Zionist. He's Catholic, he is not evangelical, right? But people in this country, 24/7, they are injected a cultural Christian Zionism through the media, through the debates, and they don't see it. They don't feel it because it all goes in the subconscious. And this is our nightmare, because we are fighting something much, much bigger than just a normal situation. So, today, we are again in this fifth phase. And, President Trump, he likes closing deals. So Huckabee saying in this interview, no such thing as a Palestinian. Again, this is land without a people. Or here he's saying, this was in Israel, there is no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There is no such thing as a settlement. These are communities. These are neighborhoods. They are cities. There is no such thing as an occupation. Now, he will become the Israeli ambassador, he will be the Israeli ambassador, actually. Not the American ambassador to Israel, but the Israeli ambassador to Israel. Mark Rubio, maybe you heard him saying, against ceasefire. And Mike Johnson, claiming he is the new Moses. And I heard him the other day talking about the prophecy, that actually what's happening in Israel these days is the fulfillment of the prophecy. So you can see, I mean, how Congress is occupied. We are trying to help them to get liberated, but I tell you, it's very difficult. And so in the book, I will try to conclude. This is why I tried in the book to redefine what Christian Zionism is. It's not these crazy evangelicals. But Christian Zionism is a Christian lobby that supports the Jewish settler colonialism. This is the connection to settler colonialism. It's a Christian lobby that supports the Jewish settler colonialism of Palestinian land using scriptural constructs within a meta-narrative while taking global consideration into account. There is always this meta-narrative there. The meta-narrative for evangelicals in this country is Christian nationalism. This is where all it's fit. For liberal theologian, it's the Holocaust. So what the new definition implies? So the definition is less focused on the biblical discourse of Christian Zionists because, many of my colleagues in the past, and Matt knows that, they said, these Christian Zionists, they don't understand the Bible. So let us do with them some exegesis. Hopeless case, doesn't work, because it's really not about that. Because this biblical discourse vary considerably from literalist to post-Holocaust theology, from very conservative to liberal. So the emphasis of our definition is on the lobbying aspect of Christian Zionism, not on what people believe. They can believe what they want, but what they do based on that belief. This is where they become very dangerous. Third, the Christian Zionist narrative is always embedded within a meta-narrative, so that those who espouse it do not see themselves as engaged in pure political lobbying, but rather as agent of a grand plan from which they read and interpret both scripture and history. All those people, many of the people who elected Trump, they thought they were exactly agent of a grand plan, right? That's the same when it comes to Israel. Alongside the meta-narrative, Christian Zionists are always connected to local issues, either global or local issues and consideration, thereby combining their ideas with struggles and fears in specific contexts. And so while they lobby for Israel, they are actually lobbying for other issues important to their specific context, like fighting, abortion, etc. Finally, Christian Zionist support for the Jewish colonial settler has less to do with head knowledge than with heart knowledge. This is why you can spend 2 weeks talking to them. It doesn't help, because it is really not because they are dumb, but because it's something emotional. So the meta-narrative changes depending on time and place. The local consideration vary depending on the context. But what all Christian Zionists have in common is an emotional attachment to the Zionist settler colonial project in Palestine. So if you would like to talk to President Biden why he is Zionist, you cannot convince him. This is something emotional. In this approach, the hermeneutical key to understanding Christian Zionism is not so much the biblical hermeneutic, but rather the lobbying in support of settler colonialism. And I tried also to show that actually the idea of settler colonialism, you can find it in the Bible. And Pekka Pitkänen, a young Finnish theologian, unfortunately he died a year and a half ago on COVID. He was the one who started talking about it. And there, the two themes of promised land and chosen people are important in this theology. If you want to find the blueprint for settler colonialism in the Bible, you go to the book of Joshua. That's the blueprint. And this is why 1958, when Israel was celebrating its 10th anniversary, Ben Gurion actually invited people for a Bible study group at his home, which you see here in the picture. He invited military generals, rabbis, politicians, and archaeologists. And they were debating conquest comes before settlement or settlement before conquest. So, should we conquest all of Palestine and then build settlement, or should we build settlement and by that we take over the land? Imagine, 58. Now, his defense minister, Dayan, wrote a book in 72 called Living with the Bible. And basically he was saying, we are the biblical generation of settlement following the Joshua conquest. And the helmet and sword are essential requirements. There will be no life for our children unless we dig shelters, and without the barbed wire fences, now walls, and the machine guns, and now F-35, we shall be unable to build a home, plant a tree, pave a road, and drill for water. So basically, Dayan was saying, Ben Gurion was not Joshua. Ben Gurion was Moses. I'm Joshua. Which lead us to Netanyahu when he declared on October 27th that the Israeli troops are entering Gaza. In the press conference, he said, you must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Bible, our Holy Bible. And basically he was quoting 1 Samuel 15:3, where God is saying, God, now go and smite Amalek and utterly destroy all that they have and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass. And this is basically what they are doing in Gaza. The Joshua factor. Also Jewish rabbi, I will, and today actually also it is now Israel is using artificial intelligence to do this job of Joshua. And this is my last point. Basically, the Bible is like the bazaar in the old city of Jerusalem, if you have been there, which means you can find in the Bible, not only in the Bible, in the Quran, same thing, by the way, everything you want. So everything you need is there. So, but the question remains, is the Bible, is the Quran a tool for colonization or liberation? That's we have, when we do hermeneutic, we have to think of this question all the time. So if you are looking for texts of settler colonialism, you go to the book of Joshua. It's there. Though this book is fiction, it's story, not history, yet it was used to colonize 4 continents. This is why Mike Pence was saying, we did exactly that in North America. If you are looking for texts to support justice for the oppressed, you go to the prophets in the Old Testament or to Jesus. So what you find in the Bible says not so much about the Bible, but about you. This is the most important thing. It doesn't matter if you are Jew or a Christian, you will find there what you are looking for. So let's together decolonize Eurocentric theologies, dismantle or settler colonial structures, and work towards a land that is shared equally, a society that is inclusive in nature, and where faith is a source for liberation and innovation. Thank you very much.
I share so much gratitude for all that you share with us. I think that if we can express our gratitude maybe just one more time for Wow. My name is Dr. Matthew Vega, and let me just start with what I felt like was my immediate reaction to the book. You seamlessly weave together history, politics, religious studies, and theology, and I'm distinguishing between religious studies and theology here because you offer a constructive theological vision, but you also do a very close analysis of religious concepts, sort of like you did just here in your presentation. The second part of the religious the analysis demonstrates your sophistication and how these concepts do political work, are contingent, they have histories, and they're not eternally binding. If it's okay, I want to give a sense of how the book is organized for those who haven't read it, very briefly. So there's an introduction. This is the book here. There's an introduction. There's 4 chapters and an epilogue. And the 4 chapters, the meat of the book, touch on 4 different themes. You touched on 2 or 3 of those chapters, yeah. Settler colonialism, Christian Zionism, the land, and then the last chapter critiques the doctrine of election. And what I would like to do is maybe ask some questions in each chapter, maybe starting with the introduction and then moving from there. And so let me start with the introduction of the book. In the introduction, you write that you were 5 years old when Israel occupied the West Bank in 1967, that they began constructing colonies on land that belonged exclusively to the Bethlehem governorate. And that, today there are, at least by the time that you wrote this book, there are 27 colonies and 150,000 settlers. Can you just share a little bit? I don't want to offend the academic. I teach here, but I don't want to offend the academic sensibilities of anyone here who. But I'm going to ask a personal question. Can you just share a little bit about your childhood in Bethlehem and how you've seen Bethlehem change from your own maybe personal perspective, from the time that you were a child up to this point?
Yeah, thank you, Matt. I mean, in 1967, Bethlehem was still the little town of Bethlehem. A small community, everyone knew everyone. It was predominantly a Christian town. We lived across the street from the Church of the Nativity. I mean, literally across the street. And maybe the first memory I have is when one of our neighbors came running down the street from Manger Square towards our home, and he was saying that the Israeli troops had entered Bethlehem. And 2 days later, the Israeli soldiers were knocking on our door looking for weapons, which we didn't have. But this is really the oldest memory I have. And in the meantime, Bethlehem is not anymore the little town. And it's not anymore this peaceful town that we used to be. Because, as I showed in the map, Israel built the Israeli settlements in the backyard of the last home in town, which means our cities cannot expand. And if they can't expand, you cannot build new neighborhood. If you cannot build new neighborhood, you are basically forced to go high and higher and higher, which, I mean, for me, Bethlehem today is very ugly, not anymore. By the way, and again, you know this story in this country, and this was done to the native people in reservations, but also it was done to the African Americans because they were put into all of these areas with no future, which created all the social problems, etc., etc. And so this is basically what's happening in Bethlehem.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm really glad that you brought up the connection to Black Americans here in the United States, because I think the primary paradigm that we apply to the history of Black Americans in the United States is one of enslavement and not colonialism necessarily. Certainly, there's a history of colonialism in Africa, and I think when you were talking about the theological software used to justify the settler colonial project, I immediately think about the theological software that was used to justify enslavement. And they both borrow from the book of Exodus, right? There's arguments of lineage from Ham, and then here in the book of Genesis as well. There are arguments of lineage made to justify settler colonialism. And I think we have some students from Black theology class. You can like shout and scream. Can you do that? You feel? Yeah. All right.
They will get extra.
They're going to get extra credit.
Yeah, extra,
oh yeah. And extra credit for. And then exploring religious meaning. Are you all in this class? Are you all here too? Can you make some noise? Yeah, they're here. So they're familiar with kind of both the liberative impulse and then the oppressive ways that theology can be used. I wonder if you could say more about this head and heart knowledge aspect of theology. When I'm thinking about, before I get there, when I'm thinking about the connections between theology used to justify enslavement, theology used to justify settler colonialism, is it, from your theological perspective, is this, how does one get to a place where their heart is maybe changed to begin to read these texts differently? Is that a miracle? Is that a process? Is that...
Actually, this is a question for you. Because the first time we met,
oh my,
you were at Wheaton College.
I was at Wheaton. Yes.
And from Wheaton to San Diego, I think there is a big. So you have to answer that question.
I see what you mean. So, I started at Wheaton as a first-generation college student. So, I was a part of a Christian Zionist megachurch, and I was a part of a residential discipleship program connected to a church that was Christian Zionist. And I was kind of like the person in the church that everyone was sort of like, look at, his life has changed, because they used to do outreach in the high-rise project buildings that I lived in, et cetera, et cetera. And I did well in school, and everyone kept saying, you need to go to Wheaton College. They weren't telling me to go anywhere else. They're like, you need to go to Wheaton. So I majored in biblical and theological studies, and I met a New Testament professor, Dr. Gary Burge, who connected me with, who introduced me to a lot of this. And I will say, I don't think I ever had like an immediate conversion from being pro-Israeli to pro-Palestinian or anything like that. I think for me, there was, my heart was, I think, already oriented towards the kinds of stories that I was hearing from Palestinians, because I was familiar with state violence, segregation, these kind of histories of theological reasoning used to support, and even in the most kind of ridiculous sort of ways, like people would say, I'm not into social justice, I'm into social Jesus, right? Which I still don't know what that means, if someone can remember. But I think I've always been, but the one thing that has changed for me since then is one of the things that you mentioned, which is, I took a course with Dr. Burge called The Theology of the Promised Land, and that's where I was introduced to the sort of arguments of Christian Zionism, and then also Palestinian Christian theologians. And I remember being really excited, wanting to go back and make biblical arguments and convert my fellow evangelical Christian Zionists. And then I realized that works in some places for people from like some of my closest friends, but in most places it didn't work. And I think I've probably changed, or my heart has been changed in some way, and similarly into the way that you articulate it. And that is to say, I guess I don't care if God supports settler colonialism, because I don't. And I don't care if God supports enslavement or racism, because I don't. And so if I have a reading, if my interlocutor can make a convincing case, and there are actually, it's not just lay academics, there are, as you showed, biblical scholars, sophisticated academics who can make arguments to justify these sorts of things. And I don't care, because ultimately I will never buy into a theology that supports violence and injustice. So I think if there's any heart conversion that's changed with me over the time, it's just simply the fact that I'm not making biblical arguments anymore. I think I prefer to just learn from folks like you, who, by the way, I was like in awe when I first met Dr. Raheb. But I do mean that, and I find inspiration from folks like you.
Maybe one thing which is important, actually, if you see how Christian Zionists today are trying to bring more people to become Christian Zionists, is through tourism. I mean, if you look at John Hagee, for example, he brings like 5,000 people every year to Palestine, and they have an experiential. This is where the emotional. It's not like they do a Bible study, but it's an emotional thing. They have an experiential program for them. They become, they buy in, and I think also the opposite is true.
Yeah.
Most of the people who became I wouldn't call them even pro-Palestinian, but who saw really what's going on there, are people who went to Palestine and saw the wall, saw the apartheid system firsthand. It's not that a book that they read, though I hope people will read my book. It's not like, but it's really through tours, through travel. And this is why with Bright Stars of Bethlehem, we try to encourage these alternative tours, authentic tours to Palestine.
Thank you. You mentioned two presidents in this chapter. You mentioned President Trump and you mentioned President Biden, and you did so in your presentation as well. How would this book have been written differently if you wrote it, you said it was published 2 weeks before October 7th. How would this book have been written differently if it was written after October 7th? Yeah,
I think the fifth stage would have been much more larger. I would have talked about genocide. In fact, I just 2 weeks ago, I sent the manuscript for a new book that
I was like, you might already be in the process of writing a new book.
And it will come out next summer, and the title is Theology After Gaza. Because I think Gaza has opened the eyes of the world, not to see the Palestinians, but to see actually the reality in so many countries that call themselves democratic countries. Thinking about the cracking down at the universities in this country. Thinking about the, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, etc. And now, there is another new, the Esther project, where they are trying basically to shut down any 501c3 organization that supports the Palestinians. So if you see what's happening in Germany, it's unbelievable, you know. And so Gaza is, I think, is a turning point. The same way that Auschwitz was a turning point. For people, they start seeing actually how Europe was dealing with the Jews, and they had to change. I think Gaza is opening the eyes of the world that, there is something rotten that nobody was seeing. I mean, we saw it before, but never as clear as now after Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think within the last year, I've seen more people become activated by Gaza. One of the blessings that I have in my life is that I don't have a family that I have to worry about sitting with at Thanksgiving. I really don't, there really is a gift. Like when I visit my mom and my siblings, this is the topic that comes up is Gaza, and because Gaza, as you mentioned, it sort of generated a new kind of a wave of concern that I also hadn't seen in a long time. Another common feature of Christian Zionism that you bring up, or a quote that you have, is you says there's an undifferentiated use of the word Israel. You say all Christian Zionists confuse the Israelites of the Bible with the Israelis today, and thereby developing, again, an emotional attachment to Jews in general, the state of Israel in particular. And I wanted to know if you can unpack a little bit about, you outline the different uses of the term Israel. You didn't get to discuss that in this evening, but I'm wondering if you could share kind of some of the distinctions that over time people have made when using the term Israel, whether in political discourse, theological discourse, historical discourse, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, actually, it's only one time in the Bible that the word Israel refers to geography, interestingly enough. But people don't know that. Israel, most of the time in the Bible, is what the so-called North Kingdom, which is the northern part of Palestine. And this name was for 200 years, more or less, for that geography. Other than that, it talks about a community that is not easily to define. It's a construct, and so. But people keep. Actually, so these are the three different, and then the state of Israel is the fourth. But people keep confusing them. They aren't sophisticated enough to try to distinguish between them. But I think the most important thing in the Bible is that when Israel is referred to as this construct, it implies that these are the oppressed by the empire who is controlling Palestine. The Assyrian, the Babylonians, the Romans. And so this is really, today, this is the Palestinians. So the Israelites of the Bible actually are very much like the Palestinians of today who are oppressed by the empire. And so there is more connection between the Israelites of the Bible and the Palestinian today if we take the context, the socio-political and economic context. And if we don't read it as a racial. The problem is reading it as a racial or as just one group of people, because the Jews of today are not like the Jews of the Bible. It's not. So I have a chapter that talks about that a bit more in
Yeah, one of the interesting, at least one of the parts that I found particularly interesting in the book, is this argument you make from Matthew, the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 5, where that verse says, "The meek shall inherit the earth," and you argue that earth should actually be translated as land. The meek will inherit the land. And that when you understand it as land, and then you see this real estate that has been dominated by Babylonians, dominated by Greeks, by Romans, you see the modern state of Israel as belonging in a long succession of empires that have dominated this space, and the indigenous Palestinians as the meek. And you argue, and this is what I found interesting about this interpretive move, was that this isn't wishful thinking either, to say that the weak will inherit the earth, because, as you argue, empires come, empires go. And I found that particularly interesting because this was a move, I think, in theological reasoning that didn't over spiritualize the kind of meaning of this text. Exactly. And it was kind of like a moment of, I'm reading like hope coming out of you, saying like, this really is, so also in alignment with hope is what we do. I'm wondering if you could say a little bit more about what hope looks like in this tragic, devastating time that we're a part of.
Yeah. I mean, Matthew 5 is something I tried to read through the lens of a longue durée, which is a French way of reading history, not as a single event, but through a longer period of time. And I talked about that in my earlier book, Faith in the Face of Empire, a bit more. And so what I'm saying is that Jesus was looking at this longue durée. I mean, you can imagine, I mean, he saw the Romans building settlements like the Israeli settlements. I mean, if you go to Caesarea Maritima, I mean, on the Mediterranean, and this was a large city. It wasn't like a settlement in what we think settlement, a large city. And you look at it, and who could have thought at the time of Jesus that the Romans will not be there after 300 years? But I think reading it longue durée, he saw that, we had the Assyrians, we have the Babylonians, we had the Persians, we have the Romans, and they come and go. Since October 7th, I was reading last week in Haaretz, so this is not like Palestinian propaganda or so, 700,000 Jewish Israeli left Israel. Because these people, they don't belong there, and if things get tough, they leave. While those who will stay, those who have no options, they will stay. And I tell you, the Palestinians will stay. They will not go away. So this is how I read this.
Yeah, I didn't want to. I have it in my notes. I was like, I remember this argument of history longue durée and faith in the face of empire. The same chapter 3, you argue that, quote, no one should be allowed to use biblical rights to violate human rights. not Jewish settlers, Israeli politicians, or naive Christian theologians. We should not allow accusations of anti-Semitism and Western guilt regarding the Holocaust to avert our eyes from Israel's colonial policies. As I was reading this, though, my question is, at the same time, we are seeing these so-called human rights selectively applied. And I think my kind of impulse is to, and maybe this is the kind of deep spirit, moral spirituality part of me that thinks that they're inclined to argue that there are, in fact, greater moral divine rights than those that are above human rights, because these so-called human rights are always going to be selectively applied, racially mal applied. And so, what do you make, or what should we make of the at least general failure to apply any of the laws, whether it's these biblical, any of these rights, biblical rights, human rights? What do you make of this kind of general, or I'm sorry, the selective application of these rights?
Yeah, I think, if we look at it historically, the idea of human rights became important after Second World War, when Europe, actually Christian Europe, destroyed itself. And then, they came together under the UN umbrella to develop something that would prevent that. But today we are in a totally different era. Today we are in the era of populism, where actually human rights don't matter that much. And you can see it now in this country. In the coming years, it's going to be tough. I have no problem to think of divine rights being above human rights, but it cannot be against human rights.
Yeah, right. Yep.
You cannot violate human rights in the name of the divine rights. And for me, human rights, they have something divine in them if we apply them to all. The problem is, and that is the problem, I think human rights were meant only for the white Europeans. They were really never meant globally for everyone. And I can show that through history in the last 50 years, how this was selectively applied, not only to the Palestinians, but to so many other contexts. And we need really to realize that. That's part of the software that we have also to crack.
Okay. That's really helpful, thinking about those two in alignment in many ways with one another. I don't know how much more...
Maybe one last.
I'll ask you one last question before we open up for Q&A. And I'll ask it from the chapter 4. The chapter is called Chosen People, ? And it's on the doctrine of election. Spanish speakers, elección, choice, right? It's about chosenness, being. And so you argue that the term election was first used in the context of devastation, and that it was meant and it was invoked in the Bible to restore hope to a people experiencing tragedy, right? God says, I have chosen you and have not cast you off. Do not fear, I'm with you. And so it's a promise to the weak and the powerless. And I guess my sort of question is, why keep, or why would, is this category of election even useful? You found it. But I guess, I wonder if you could say more about the relationship to this category and whether or not, my immediate reaction is, could this possibly still be used against Palestinian. For example, if it's used in the context of if it's for the weak and the downtrodden, what if I say, well, I'm the weak one in this situation and have been stepped on?
Yeah, I mean, it is a very dangerous idea. And historically, we can show how in so many countries in the world this was misused. I mean, from Japan, I mean, even in non-Christian countries. Because when a strong nation starts seeing itself as chosen, they always create mess. But when you have people who are living under imperial rule and they are oppressed, and the empire keeps telling them, you are nothing, you are backward, you are this, you are that, you will never have a future. This idea that God is telling this group, no, you are not. I chose you not because you are the strongest. I chose you because you are the smallest. That actually, you can read it as, and this is what I try to do in the book, the Bible in this context become a literature of resistance. What Ghassan Kanafani, the Palestinian writer, called literature of resistance. And for me, we need to read the Bible as a book, literature of resistance. It's not, it's a book for liberation, not for colonization. We have always to keep this in mind. This is the main hermeneutical key to understanding and to unlocking the Bible. Otherwise, the Bible becomes really the text of the occupiers, and it's very dangerous. I give another example. Often, I mean, when the first Christians in the first 3 centuries in the catacomb underground were saying God is with us, this was a statement of faith. When German soldiers wrote on their belt, God is with us, Gott ist mit uns, God help us. I mean, this has nothing to do with faith. This became an oppressive ideology, utilizing the name of God for oppression and for colonization of Europe. And so we have to crack that.
Thank you so much. I think we can give it up one more time because that was a lot. And then I think we're going to open up a space for questions from the audience as well. And then is it just kind of, are we going to pass a mic around or? Okay.
And if anybody wants to be on a sign-up list, I'll pass that around.
Hi, thank you very much. I have a question regarding the Israelites in relation to the Jews that came from Europe. And so through history, there was the people that came into Palestine, there was no eviction of the natives that lived there. They were farmers, left them to farm and so on. So there was nobody actually left, the Jews and others, when somebody came in. So these people that came from Poland and Ukraine and Eastern Europe into Palestine, the thought is, if you can say, actually the Palestinians that stayed in their land and stayed in their homes, basically, and some of them were Jews, some of them were others, and they converted into Christianity and Islam and when everybody else come. So if you can maybe elaborate on that. Actually, the people came from Europe has nothing to do with the Israelites.
Yeah, I mean, we have to realize that when we say Palestinians, and I tried to talk about that in the book. Palestine has been always a pluralistic society. Never ever was one religion able to control Palestine. So always people of different faith lived together. And so Judaism is part of Palestine. So this is why we have nothing against Jews as such. And until 1948, Jews were Palestinians. There was no contradiction between both. The problem is when now European Jews came as settler colonialists. And by the way, these European Jews that you mentioned were not nice to the native Jews. And not all Jews are for the state of Israel. I mean, in New York you have, in Brooklyn you have maybe 1 million Jews who are totally against the state of Israel. And in this room, you know, I mean, you have, so the thing is, the problem is with Jews who came as European settlers. Israel as the last European settler colonial project. That's our problem. And this is why actually, many of the native Jews in Palestine are also neglected by the world. Nobody talks to them because usually it's European talking to European. Even the whole interfaith thing. You will never see, an Ethiopian Jews in this. You will never see an ultra-Orthodox Jew. It's always these white people talking to each other. No, it is. This is what it is. I mean, they call it interfaith. It has nothing to do with interfaith.
I just want to mention, genetically, they're not belong to the land.
I mean, I would recommend. I would recommend the book, The Invention of the Jewish People by Shlomo Sand, who tackled this issue as a Jewish professor, and he received lots of heat for that. I mean, he was threatened.
Hello. That's louder than I thought it was going to be. Hi, my name is Aida. I'm a Palestinian Christian. And I'm so thankful for you and your work. I studied at Princeton Theological Seminary. I've been following you for a while, even as a child. And I never took a class from George Hunsinger, and I'm okay with that. That was the editor of the Karl Barth book that was featured earlier this evening. I understand settler colonialism as you explain it. And I wonder, and I remember asking this last year at a seminar with a legal scholar on the topic of the genocide. Is there a specific term for the way that Israel keeps Palestinians from coming back, even to see family? My teta was kicked out in 1948, and I've never been able to return to Birzeit. And my sister, in an attempt to go back, was detained. And that's how it goes. And I find that to be a very specific phenomenon of this version of apartheid. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. What does it mean when the diaspora aren't allowed to come back and everyone else is? Thank you.
Yeah, that's part of what Sayer described as pumping out and pumping in. That if you are Jewish, and you don't need even to be Jewish, if you claim that your grandma was Jewish, this is enough to get a free check and full citizenship. And you don't need even the 5 years like in this country to be, citizen alien and then you become No. The moment you enter the airport in Tel Aviv, you receive your Israeli passport. If you are Palestinians and as you described, it doesn't work. And this is how actually, and by the way, it's not only the Israeli that did that to us. The British did the same thing. Many Palestinian, especially Christians who went to South America, when they wanted to come back, the British allowed them for 6 months. They gave them a window of 6 months. At that time, nobody heard about this, so they couldn't come back, and they were forced to stay abroad. And today, talking about Palestinian Christians, in historic Palestine, we have 170,000 Palestinian Christians. Worldwide, we have around 1 million Palestinian Christians, which means all these Christians are abroad. Many of them would love, like yourself, to come back. What would that mean for us as a church if all of these Princeton graduates and others would come back? I mean, so that's our problem. But the thing is, now theologically speaking, in the Hebrew Bible, the diaspora is seen always as something negative. In the New Testament, Jesus is telling, go, which means we don't need to look at the diaspora as people who have abandoned Palestine or something. Today, the Palestinian diaspora actually is a very, very crucial and important. It's people like yourself who are fighting for Palestine in the diaspora. This is totally different than the first generation, the grandparents and the parents who didn't really want to even to say that they are Palestinians. They wanted to blend. But now your generation is a generation that gives us lots of hope. So don't give up hope. You will go one day to Palestine, and we'll talk about it more.
Just as a brief follow-up on her question, and I heard you looking for a legal term for that specific form of apartheid, but I guess the other question, what do you call the policy of our government that allows another country to treat certain citizens of our country differently than the rest of us? Because if I want to go to Birzeit, I can go to Birzeit, but you can't. Because even though we're both carrying American passports, and I just want to name that our country has a policy that is complicit with that policy. Is there even anybody talking about that in like the international human rights world?
Right. I mean, this issue was raised like 2 years ago. And the American administration, because Israel wanted to have a visa waiver, they kept pushing for it. The Biden administration said, we cannot give you that when you treat our American citizens who happen to be Palestinians or others differently. And so there was the idea that Palestinian with an American citizenship can travel to Palestine back and forth without a problem. But the Israeli, they say something, they do something else. So they got the visa waiver, but it's very difficult still for American citizens to travel freely. They are often, detained, humiliated, they have to wait hours, etc. And so, unfortunately, that is. And I think Palestinian American and others in this country has to follow that legally, because it's a legal issue. Okay, I
Hi,
think.
my name's Salah. I'm a Palestinian. My question is archaeological. And I was trying to dig on my phone to get some evidence, but it's too slow. There's no connection. Based on my recall, that based on top Israeli archaeologists, they find hardly any of the Hebrew biblical stories in Palestine. They say even Jerusalem is supposed to be the city of David. In the Hebrew, it looks like it was built on a huge, large mountains, but there is no mountains in Jerusalem. Jerusalem is just hills. And it seems like none of these stories actually was happening in Palestine. I don't know what kind of history they have there. Maybe after they left the Babylon, after that period, they lived 500 years, maybe some of them went back to Palestine and established 2 states. But those Israelite state, like the Jacob, the son of Jacob, the Abraham stories, the Israelites and the Jews, they were fighting each other. That's completely different than what they found in Palestine. There was not even one evidence of these stories. Like, for example, if the wall of Jericho, there are no walls in Jericho, guys. Not even one wall. So these old stories, I don't think all made up. What do you think? Thank you.
No, I mean, there was a wall in Jericho. You can see it at Tel Jericho. The problem there is that the biblical story, if you think of it, and really, if it collapsed, it should have collapsed towards the inside, which is not the case archaeologically. But the problem is we need to distinguish between story and history, which I said in the problem is many people try to read the Bible as a book of history, which is not. It's story. So, but people are not trained to read it this way. Now, what Finkelstein and other new Jewish historian talked about is something that, as theologians, we wrote about in the 19th century. I mean, anyone who study theology from a critical point of view, this is how we read the Bible. The problem is that, the ordinary people don't read the Bible like that. And pastors are not, many of them, when they preach, they go back to talk about the Bible as if it were history. So we need to rethink and to really to understand that these are stories. So the story of Jericho is a story. And usually, like the story of Jericho is, it's the people of Palestine trying to find the reason why is this wall destroyed. So often they ask a question, why is it like this? You have, Sodom and Gomorrah, yeah? You have these salt figures around the Dead Sea. So they ask themselves, what is that? And then, this was, this, she looked back and then she became, so it's a different, and so they try to tell us a lesson through these stories, but it's not history. And we need, I think, to read the Bible through this way. And about Abraham, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, I say in the book, I know what I'm saying is, for some people of you might be difficult, because if you believe that the Bible came down from heaven, you think I'm just an apostate. But actually what I'm saying in the book is that Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, really they didn't belong together. They are not relatives. Abraham is like the chief of a group in the south of Palestine. Jacob is in the north, etc. And then the people in Palestine were asking themselves, how do they belong together? Do they belong together? Do we need to fight each other? And then they developed this construct, which is great, that actually, no, we are related. And these Ammonite, they don't belong really to us, but they are neighbors, so they are kosher. And so it was an idea actually to develop a unifying vision for Palestine among all the different tribes. And you do that by connecting people as a family, which is the way we do things in Palestine. So you are Palestinians and you know that. So if you meet another Palestinian, the first question you ask that, Ibn min inte, or min dar min. So you are, which family do you belong to? Now in the States you never ask this question. In the States you ask, where do you live? Because you want to know if he is rich or poor or... Now, this is how it is in a capitalistic society. But in our case, it's always you ask Ibn min, who's your family? And so the family becomes the way you describe relations to each other. And so this was the original idea of this genealogy between Abraham. So it's a great idea. I mean, it's much more interesting idea than thinking, these are the... you have always to kick someone out, right? This is how we were trained to read it. So Isaac was good. Ishmael was kicked out. And then, Jacob was okay. Esau was kicked out. So we were trained to read it as, no, but the Bible is saying, these were the groups living in Palestine, but these others were living around, but they belong to us. It's a totally different. It's an inclusive rather than an exclusive. But we were trained to read that in an exclusive way. Again, this is how the Bible was misused all along.
I don't know if we have time for
one
more question.
Yeah. Okay, one more. Yeah,
one
okay.
more and then, yeah.
Thank you. Good evening. You mentioned that early in the creation of the State of Israel, there was consideration of other names. And I'm wondering to what extent, I guess, that debate or that conversation revolved around a strategic attempt to weaponize this biblical name. And I guess by extension, have you found anything related to also the specific choice of the flag of the State of Israel? And, obviously the Star of David and its presence there, any intentional weaponizing?
Yeah, I mean, regarding the name, as I said, really the two most debated names were Herzliya, referring to Theodor Herzl, or Ziona, referring to Zionism and Zion. Which tells you this was more like a secular idea. And it was actually Ben-Gurion who, in the last 15 minutes, introduced, no, we should call it Israel, and then they jumped on this name. Which again was more like more a biblical name than the two others' name. Though Zion is biblical, but the idea was with the Zionism more than with geography. And the other question, I forgot what it was. The flag. Yeah, I mean, the flag, they say it represents, the two rivers. I'm not sure if this is really what it is. I couldn't see any explicit reference to it, that it represents from Nile to the Euphrates. And actually today, some of the Israeli politicians in Netanyahu's government, they are starting to talk about that this should be the borders of Israel. I think the mic is telling me I have to end.
Thank you all for your questions. Thank Reverend Doctor. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us.